So when we left off in The Hobbit the last time, all of the dwarves and Gandalf had come into Bilbo's home, and the dwarves had done the dishes and they had dinner, and they put away everything and then got out their instruments and started reading. Got an ad in 3 minutes, by the way. So Bilbo has said, "Hey, let's turn on the lights so that we can talk about this." And all the dwarves said, "We like the dark," said all the dwarves. "Dark for dark business. There are many hours before dawn." "Of course," said Bilbo, and sat down in a hurry. He missed the stool and sat in the fender, knocking over the poker and the shovel with a crash. "Hush," said Gandalf. "Let Thorin speak." And this is how Thorin began. "Gandalf, dwarves, and Mr. Baggins, we are met together in the house of our friend and fellow conspirator, this most excellent and audacious hobbit. May the hair on his toes never fall out. All praise to his wine and ale." He paused for breath and for a polite remark from the hobbit, but the compliments were quite lost on poor Bilbo Baggins, who was wagging his mouth in protest at being called audacious and, worst of all, fellow conspirator, though no noise came out, he was so flummoxed. And so Thorin went on. "We are met to discuss our plans, our ways, means, policy, and devices. We shall soon before break of day start on our long journey, a journey from which some of us, or perhaps all of us, except our friend and counselor, the ingenious wizard Gandalf, may never return. It is a solemn moment. Our object is, I take it, well known to us all. To the estimable Mr. Baggins, and perhaps to one or two of the younger dwarfs. I think I should be right in naming Keely and Feely, for instance. The exact situation at the moment may require a little brief explanation." This was Thorin's style. He was an important dwarf. If he had been allowed, he probably would have gone on like this until he was out of breath, without telling anyone there anything that was not known already. Do you guys know people like that? Like they talk a lot, but they don't say much? That's the kind of energy that Thorin's giving. But he was rudely interrupted. Poor Bilbo couldn't bear it any longer. May never return. He began to feel a shriek coming up inside, and very soon it burst out like the whistle of an engine coming out of a tunnel. All of the dwarfs sprang up, knocking over the table. Gandalf struck a blue light on the end of his magic staff, and in its firework glare, the poor little hobbit could be seen kneeling on the hearth, shaking like a jelly that was melting. And then he fell flat on the floor and kept on calling out, "Struck by lightning! Struck by lightning!" over and over again. And that was all they could get out of him for a long time. So they took him and laid him out of the way on the drawing room sofa with a drink at his elbow, and they went back to their dark business. "Excitable little fellow," said Gandalf as they sat down again. "Gets funny, queer fits, but he is one of the best. One of the best. As fierce as a dragon in a pinch." If you have ever seen a dragon in a pinch, you will realize that this was only poetical exaggeration applied to any hobbit, even to old Took's great grand uncle Bull Roarer, who was so huge for a hobbit that he could ride a horse. He charged the ranks of the goblins at Mount Graham in the Battle of the Green Fields and knocked their king Gullfimble's head clean off with a wooden club. It sailed 100 yards through the air and went down a rabbit hole. And in this way, the battle was won, and the game of golf invented at the same moment. In the meanwhile, however, Bull Roarer's gentler descendant was reviving in the drawing room. After a while and a drink, he crept nervously to the door of the parlor. This is what he heard. Glowin speaking, or some snort more or less like that. "Will he do you think? It's all very well for Gandalf to talk about this hobbit being fierce. A shriek like that in a moment of excitement would be enough to wake the dragon and all his relatives and kill the lot of us. I think it sounded more like fright than excitement. In fact, if it had not been for the sign on the door, I should have been sure we had come to the wrong house." As soon as I clapped eyes on the little fellow bobbling and puffing on the mat, I had my doubts. He looks more like a gooser than a burglar. Then Mr. Baggins turned the handle and went in. The Took side had won. He suddenly felt he would go without bed and breakfast to be thought fierce. As for little fellow bobbing on the mat, almost made him really fierce. Many a time afterwards, the Baggins part regretted what he did now, and he said to himself, Bilbo, you were a fool. You walked right in and put your foot in it. Pardon me, he said, if I have overheard words that you were saying. I don't pretend to understand what you are talking about. Your reference to burglars. I think I am right in believing, this is what he called being on his dignity, that you think I am no good. I will show you. I have no signs on my door. It was painted a week ago, and I'm quite sure you have come to the wrong house. As soon as I saw your funny faces on the doorstep, I had my doubts. But treat it as the right one. Tell me what you want done, and I will try it. If I have to walk from here to the east of the east and fight the wild wereworms of the last desert. I once had a great great grand uncle once Bull Roarer took. Yes, yes, but that was long ago, said Glowin. I was talking about you. And I assure you that there is a mark on this door, the usual one in the trade, on used to be. Burglar wants a good job, plenty of excitement, and reasonable reward. That's how it's usually read. You can say expert treasure hunter instead of burglar if you like. Some of them do. It's all the same to us. Gandalf told us that there was a man of the sort in these parts looking for a job at once, and that he had arranged for a meeting here this Wednesday at tea time. Of course there's a mark, said Gandalf. I put it there myself, for very good reasons. You asked me to find the 14th man for your expedition, and I chose Mr. Baggins. Just let anyone say I chose the wrong man or the wrong house, and you can stop at 13 and have the bad luck you like, or go back to digging coal. He scowled so angrily at Glowin that the dwarf huddled back in his chair. And when Bilbo tried to open his mouth to ask him a question, he turned and frowned at him and stuck out his bushy eyebrows till Bilbo shut his mouth tight with a snap. That's right, said Gandalf. Let's have no more argument. I have chosen Mr. Baggins, and that ought to be enough for all of you. If I say he is a burglar he is, or he will be when the time comes. I love that. He will be when the time comes. He may not be now, but he will. There is a lot more in him than you guess, and a deal more than he has any idea of himself. You may possibly all live to thank me yet. Now, Bilbo, my boy, fetch the lamp and let's have a little bit of light on this. On the table, in the light of a big lamp with a red shade, he spread a piece of parchment rather like a map. This was made by Thror, your grandfather, Thorin, he said in answer to the dwarf's excited questions. It is a plan of the mountain. I don't see that this will help us much, said Thorin disappointedly after a glance. I remember the mountain well enough and the lands about it, and I know where Mirkwood is and the withered heath where the great dragons bred. There's a dragon marked in red on the mountain, said Balin, but it will be easy enough to find him without that, if we ever arrive there. There is one point you haven't noticed, said the wizard, and that is the secret entrance. Secret entrance. Secret entrance. You see that rune on the west side, and the hand pointing to it from the other runes. That marks a hidden passage to the lower halls. Mhm. And in parentheses, it says, look at the map at the beginning of this book, and you will see there are runes. So, the map at the beginning of the book. Actually, you know what? Map at the beginning of the book. There's the mountain. There's the hand pointing towards the runes. Oh, she's smart. It's a craft. It may have been secret once, said Thorn, but how do we know that it is secret any longer? Old Smog has lived there long enough now to find out anything there is to know about those caves. Oh, yeah, babe, you didn't see Rigatoni on a stage? She on a stage. You're so excited. Oh, yeah, you're yelling during story time. We got the curtains back there. She looking good. We did some more highlights on the pasta. We're going to do a stage with some little fancy things. We're going to do your disco ball up here. She is a blessed pile of rigatoni. Chief of all rigatonis. It may have been secret once, said Thorin, but how do we know that it is secret any longer? Old Smog has lived there long enough now to find out anything there is to know about those caves. He may, but he can't have used it for years and years. Why? Because it is too small. 5 feet high, the door, and 3 may walk abreast, say the runes, but Smog could not creep into a hole that size, not even when he was a young dragon. Certainly not after devouring so many of the dwarves and the men of Dale. It seems a great big hole to me, squeaked Bilbo, who had no experience of dragons and only of hobbit holes. He was getting excited and interested again, so that he forgot to keep his mouth shut. He loved maps, and in this hall there hung a large one of the country round, with all his favorite walks marked on it in red ink. Now that's adorable. He has a map, and he has all of his favorite walks marked on the map in red ink. I love that. That sounds like Flippy. Could such a large door be kept secret from everybody outside, apart from the dragon? He asked. He was only a little hobbit, if you remember. In lots of ways, said Gandalf. But in what way this one has been hidden, we don't know without going to see. From what it says on the map, I should guess there is a closed door which has been made to look exactly like the side of the mountain. That is the usual dwarf's method. I think that is right, isn't it? Quite right, said Thorin. Also, went on Gandalf, I forgot to mention that with the map went a key, a small and curious key. There it is, he said, and he handed to Thorin a key with a long barrel and intricate wards made of silver. Keep it safe. Indeed, I will, said Thorin, and he fastened it upon a fine chain that hung about his neck and under his jacket. Now things begin to look more hopeful. This news alters them much for the better. So far, we have had no clear idea of what to do. We thought of going east, as quiet and careful as we could, as far as the Long Lake. After that, the trouble would begin. A long time before that, if I know anything about the roads east, interrupted Gandalf. We might go up from there along the river running, went on Thorin, taking no notice, and so to the ruins of Dale, the old town with the valley there under the shadow of the mountain. But we none of us like the idea of the front gate. The river runs right out of it through the great cliff at the south of the mountain, and out of it comes the dragon too. Far too often, unless he has changed his habits. That would be no good, said the wizard, not without a mighty warrior, even a hero. I tried to find one, but warriors are busy fighting one another in distant lands, and in this neighborhood heroes are scarce, or simply not to be found. Swords in these parts are mostly blunt, and axes are used for trees, and shields as cradles or dish covers, and dragons are comfortably far off and therefore legendary. That is why I settled on burglary, especially when I remembered the existence of a side door. And here is our little Bilbo Baggins, the burglar, the chosen and selected burglar. So now let's get on and make some plans. Very well, then, said Thorn. Supposing the burglar expert gives us some ideas or suggestions. He turned with mock politeness to Bilbo. First, I should like to know a bit more about things, said he, feeling all confused and a bit shaky inside, but so far still tookishly determined to go on with things. Cowboy inside voices, please. I mean about the gold and the dragon and all that, and how we got there, and who it belongs to, and so on and further. Bless me, said Thorn. Haven't you got a map? Didn't you hear our song? Haven't we been talking about this for hours? All the same, I should like it all plain and clear, he said obstinately. Me, putting on his business manner, usually reserved for people who tried to borrow money off him, and doing his best to appear wise and prudent and professional and live up to Gandalf's recommendation. Also, I would like to know about risks, out of pocket expenses, time required, and remuneration, and so forth, by which he meant, what am I going to get out of it? And am I going to come back alive? Oh, very well, said Thorn. Long ago in my grandfather Thror's time, our family was driven out of the far north and came back with all their wealth and their tools to this mountain on the map. It had been discovered by my far ancestor, Thrain the Old. Now they mined and they tunneled and they made huger walls and greater workshops. And in addition, I believe they found a good deal of gold and a great many jewels too. Anyway, they grew immensely rich and famous, and my grandfather was king under the mountain again, and treated with great reverence by the mortal men who lived to the south, and were gradually spreading up the running river as far as the valley overshadowed by the mountain. They built the merry town of Dale there in those days. Kings used to send for our smiths and reward even the least skillful most richly. Fathers would beg us to take their sons as apprentices and pay us handsomely, especially in food supplies, which we never bothered to grow or find for ourselves. Altogether, those were good days for us, and the poorest of us had money to spend and to lend, and leisure to make beautiful things just for the fun of it, not to speak of the most marvelous and magical toys, the like of which is not to be found in the world nowadays. So my grandfather's halls became full of armor and jewels and carvings and cups, and the toy market of Dale was the wonder of the North. Undoubtedly, that was what brought the dragon. Dragons steal gold and jewels, from men and elves and dwarves, wherever they can find them, and they guard their plunder as long as they live, which is practically forever unless they are killed, and never enjoy a brass ring of it. Indeed, they hardly know a good bit of work from a bad, though they usually have a good notion of the current market value. And they can't make a thing for themselves, not even mend the little loose scale of their armor. There were lots of dragons in the north in those days, and gold was probably getting scarce up there, with the dwarves flying south or getting killed, and all the general waste and destruction that dragons make going from bad to worse. There was a most specially greedy, strong, and wicked worm called Smog. One day he flew up into the air and came south. The first we heard of it was a noise like a hurricane coming from the north, and the pine trees on the mountain creaking and crackling in the wind. Some of the dwarfs who happened to be outside, I was one, luckily, a fine adventurous lad in those days, always wandering about, and it saved my life that day. Well, from a good way off, we saw the dragon settle on our mountain in a spout of flame. Then he came down the slopes, and when he reached the woods, they all went up in fire. By that time, all the bells were ringing in Dale, and the warriors were arming. The dwarfs rushed out of their great gate, but there was the dragon waiting for them. None escaped that day. The river rushed up in steam, and a fog fell on Dale, and in the fog, the dragon came on them and destroyed most of the warriors. The usual unhappy story was only too common in those days. Then he went back and crept in through the front gate and routed out all the halls and lanes and tunnels, alleys, cellars, mansions, and passages. After that, there were no dwarves left alive inside, and he took all of their wealth for himself. Probably, for that is the dragon's way, he's piled it all up in a great heap far inside, and he sleeps on it for a bed. Later, he used to crawl out of the great gate and come by night to Dale and carry away people, especially maidens, to eat, until Dale was ruined and all the people dead or gone. What goes on there now, I don't know for certain, but I don't suppose any one lives nearer to the mountain than the far edge of the long lake nowadays. A few of us that were well outside sat and wept in hiding and cursed Smaug, and they were unexpectedly joined by my father and my grandfather with singed beards. They looked very grim, but they said very little. When I asked how they had got away, they told me to hold my tongue and said that one day, in the proper time, I should know. After that, we went away, and we have had to earn our livings as best we could up and down the lands, often sinking as low as blacksmith work or even coal mining. But we have never forgotten our stolen treasure. And even now, when I will allow we've had a good bit laid by and are not so badly off. Here, Thorin stroked the gold chain round his neck. Got that drip. We still mean to get it back, and to bring our curses home to Smog, if we can. I have often wondered about my father's and my grandfather's escape. I see now they must have had a private side door, which only they knew about. But apparently they made a map, and I should like to know how Gandalf got a hold of it, and why it did not come down to me, the rightful heir. I did not get hold of it, I was given it, said the wizard. Your grandfather Thror was killed, you remember, in the mines of Moria by Azog the Goblin. Curse his name, yes, said Thorin. And Thrain, your father, went away on the 21st of April, 100 years ago last Thursday, and has never been since, and has never been seen by you since. True, true, said Thorin. Well, your father gave me this to give to you, and I have chosen my own time and way for handing it over. You can hardly blame me, considering the trouble I had to find you. Your father could not remember his own name when he gave me the paper, and he never told me yours. So, on the whole, I think I ought to be praised and thanked. Here it is, he said, handing the map to Thorin. I don't understand, said Thorin, and Bilbo felt he would have liked to say the same. The explanation did not seem to explain. Your grandfather, said the wizard slowly and grimly, gave the map to his son for safety before he went to the mines of Moria. Your father went away to try his luck with the map after your grandfather was killed, and lots of adventures of a most unpleasant sort he had, but he never got near the mountain. How he got there, I don't know, but I found him a prisoner in the dungeons of a necromancer. Whatever were you doing there? Asked Thorin with a shudder, and all the dwarfs shivered. Never you mind. I was finding things out as usual, and a nasty, dangerous business it was. Even I, Gandalf, only just escaped. I tried to save your father, but it was too late. He was witless and wandering, and had forgotten almost everything except the map and the key. We have long ago paid the goblins of Moria, said Thorin, and we must give a thought to the necromancer. Don't be absurd. He's an enemy far beyond the powers of all the dwarfs put together, if they could all be collected again from the four corners of the world. The one thing your father wished for was for his son to read the map and use the key. The dragon and the mountain are more than big enough tasks for you. Hear, hear, said Bilbo, and he accidentally said that aloud. Hear what? They all said, turning suddenly towards him, and he was so flustered that he answered, Hear what things I have to say. What's that? They asked. Well, I should say that you ought to go east and have a look around. After all, there is a side door, and dragons must sleep sometimes, I suppose. If you sit on the doorstep long enough, I dare say you'll think of something. And, well, I think we have talked long enough for one night, if you see what I mean. Bed and an early start and all that. I will give you a good breakfast before you go. Before we go, I suppose you mean? Said Thorin. Aren't you the burglar? And isn't sitting on the doorstep your job? Not to speak of getting inside the door? But I agree about bed, and breakfast. I like 6 eggs with my ham when starting on a journey, fried, not poached. And mind you, don't break them. After all the others had ordered their breakfasts without so much as a please, which annoyed Bilbo very much, they all got up. The hobbit had to find room for them all and filled all his spare bedrooms and made beds on chairs and sofas before he got them all stowed, and he went to his own little bed, very tired and not altogether happy. One thing he did make up his mind about was not to bother to get up very early and cook everybody else's wretched breakfast. The tookishness was wearing off, and he was not now quite so sure that he was going on any journey in the morning. As he lay in bed, he could hear Thorin still humming to himself in the best bedroom next to him. Far over the misty mountains cold, the dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day to find our long forgotten gold. Bilbo went to sleep with that in his ears, and it gave him very uncomfortable dreams. It was long after the break of day when he woke up. That's the end of the chapter. The end of chapter 1. Thoughts, opinions? Cowboy has not read this book before. Snap, have you read it? I know that Teague and Cody and Alice have. I would love to hear everybody's thoughts on what's happened so far. You've not read it? Oh, this is your first time? Okay. GG's chapter 1. We did it. We did it. Gold stars to us all. It's so good. Bilbo? God, I love him. He's so good. I love how he just does not want to cook everybody's wretched breakfast. You should use this time to shortly discuss themes or something because educational purposes. Okay. Um, I mean, are you for real? Educational purposes? Okay. So, okay. When reading a book, I'm your unofficial media laws lawyer. Well, okay. Oh, I understand. So talking about themes in a book. Got it. Um, so even those of you who have not read this book before, I think it's interesting that starting a book and being introduced to these characters, it's very obvious at the beginning who is going to play the biggest parts here. So we see an intersection between Bilbo, who is wanting saying he wants one thing, but then there's another side of him, right? That's starting to come out. Hi, Danny. Glad you're participating. Nice to see you. Um, so Bilbo definitely has these two parts of himself. I am reading excerpts and featuring commentary and education. That is what we are doing. Thank you, Cowboy. I am picking up what you're putting down. Um, this is about a bigger journey, right? The subtitle, it's called The Hobbit or There and Back Again. There is a journey that happens, but there's also this inward journey that Bilbo is going on. And we see glimpses of that come out, right? He wants to be comfortable. He wants to be a hobbit. He wants to have comfort, I think chiefly is what he's seeking. But then it describes it as being the tookish side of him. Someone from his family was very adventurous, and he has a small part of that within himself that sort of wakes up. Um, and so within Bilbo, we see these two parts of him battling it out. But of course, as we're meeting this cast of characters, it's very clear who the leading characters are and who some of the supporting characters are, right? We've got Bilbo, we've got Thorin, and we've got Gandalf. And then supporting, we have all the other dwarves who will chime in with their own personalities and their own thoughts and suggestions as we go on this journey. You don't like that this is getting close to home really quickly? Yeah, so last night I was chatting with Cowboy I was encouraging her to listen to me read the first part of the chapter from Wednesday's stream because I figured that she would be here for the rest of the streams. And I think it's such a good introduction to who Bilbo is. Like you hear the dialogue that he's saying and he's very polite. Even in the beginning when he sees Gandalf for the first time, he's like, "Good morning." Like, go away. It could mean good morning. Like, "Hello, I'm happy to see you." But he's also very I don't know. I think it could be Southern America kind of nice, like a bless your heart kind of undercutting where you're saying things nice that are not super nice. And we see that in Bilbo. Like he says nice things, but there's a an inner part of him that has a different truth. The outer part of him doesn't always say. Oh, bless her heart. Yeah, that sort of thing. Like, "Hup, good morning. Don't let me keep you," sort of situation where you want something to happen. But socially, maybe you can't say, "Get off my front porch. Stop making marks on my front door." He's softer than cotton candy in the rain. Part of him, yeah. But then you discover that what is holding the cotton candy together is the stick that it's mounted on, right? So maybe this Tookish part of himself is who he truly is. Maybe that's the core of him. And he's just wrapped this softness and this comfort around himself to cover up who he is. Slow your roll, Professor. No, I think he's a good character. I like him a lot. I think it's sweet too. The way that I don't know. Maybe it's part of it is probably that I know the story and I have this fondness for Bilbo that he doesn't quite know who he is. He thinks he knows who he is, but let me go back to what Gandalf says about him. God, Thorin just has so many words, right? I think he's the type of guy who likes to hear himself talk. Okay. Hmm. Where is this? I literally just read it. Yeah, I think that's something that's not really separated by gender. I think I've met lots of different people who like to hear the words that they say. Okay, so it was before this. Okay. Okay. So this is when Bilbo lets out his little shriek and then he has to go rest on the couch for a bit, which is such a mood, right? You get a fright and then you have to go rest with a little drink at your elbow. And so all the dwarves and Gandalf are talking about him from the other room. And Gandalf is kind of taking his side. And this dialogue alone shows that Gandalf sees something within Bilbo that no one else sees, and especially Bilbo doesn't see himself. Excitable little fellow, gets funny, queer fits, but he is one of the best, as fierce as a dragon in a pinch. How would Gandalf have known that? It sounds like there haven't been a ton of interactions between Gandalf and Bilbo, right? He hasn't even seen Bilbo in a pinch, but he sees some sort of spark within Bilbo that tells him that this is true, right? And then we see that come true when they just keep yapping about him, and Bilbo's like, I'm gonna stand up for myself. And then Mr. Baggins turned the handle and he went into the room. The Took side had won. He, and this is, I love this. He suddenly felt that he would go without bed and breakfast to be thought fierce. What does he love? He loves comfort. He loves his bed. What does he love? He loves his food. He loves eating cakes. He loves tea time. And he says he would give up those things that he cherishes most for someone to think that he was fierce. Where did that come from? He's had that in himself the whole time. Gandalf saw it in him. And this is kind of, I don't know, helping him blossom, kind of revealing what is in there. Maybe, maybe it's because he knows his family history. Maybe he knows that, somewhere in my line, there were people who did that stuff and I come from them. So, maybe I could do it too. Oh, you may have fallen asleep a little. Pink is so cute. I'm going to put you all to sleep. I love it. And he's just, I love it. And part of it may be that he is small in stature.